All right, so get ready, because today we are going deep, deep into something pretty bizarre, I would say. We're going to be exploring what is called Setalim, and that translates to seven beyond. But, this isn't just some far-off galaxy or, like a mystical land. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's described as this parallel universe, but it's way more unsettling than, like, the typical alternate reality idea that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
And to help us with this deep dive, we are going to be using this interview transcript with a guy named Luciano Melici, who's kind of become like a key figure in researching and like collecting all these different accounts of Sekalim.
One of the things that makes Setalim so fascinating is that, like, consistently it is described as this, like, desolate and frightening place, almost like a warped mirror image of, like, our world.
Right.
And the accounts that we have, they're not just, like, vague theories or anything like that. These are firsthand experiences from people who actually claim to have, encountered it.
Yeah, I think that's what is so creepy about it, to me at least. It's like there's this recurring theme of Setalim being somehow aware of our world. It's like it knows we're here, and it wants to keep us out.
But hold on. Before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's start with Luciano's own experience, because his story is really what kind of, like, kick-started this whole phenomenon.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So his initial encounter with this, it was way back in 1994. It's incredibly vivid. He was on a bus ride home from college, and this was a route that he took, like, all the time. But that day, it was, like, eerily empty.
Hold on, wait. So usually a crowded bus and suddenly empty. Okay, that's already setting off alarm bells.
You know, right? And then it gets even stranger. So the other passengers that are on this bus, they start urging him to get off the bus, specifically mentioning Setalim as the reason why. It's almost like they knew something was wrong, something that he wasn't picking up on, Yeah. It's like they recognized something about the bus or the route, something that was like, Setalim, like, that is so creepy. But did he even understand what they were talking about?
He didn't at the time, no. In fact, he actually dismissed the whole thing as just like some really weird coincidence. But, looking back, he realized that bus encounter, it was just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so he brushes it off, and then, years later, he creates this Orkut community, right?
Yeah.
And that's when things really kind of, like, blow up.
Exactly, yeah. It's fascinating how the internet has enabled this, like, sharing of these types of experiences, and the formation of these communities around them. So he started this Orkut community just for, like, his friends and stuff, but it completely unexpectedly attracted all of these complete strangers who shared their own, like, unsettling stories about Setalim.
Wait, so even before his bus story went viral, there were already all these accounts of Setalim, like, floating around out there. Were there any kind of pattern to them?
There definitely were some common threads. I mean, a lot of people describe Setalim as this, like, bleak, almost post-apocalyptic landscape. Some even spoke of encountering, like, strange beings there, like entities that seemed to be both aware of them but also hostile to their presence.
Oh, okay, that's giving me chills. And what I find really intriguing, too, is that these accounts weren't all just personal experiences. Some were like tales passed down through generations, almost like inherited memories.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the nature of, like, collective consciousness, doesn't it? Could these stories be tapping into some kind of shared ancestral memory, like a primal fear of something lurking, but just beyond our reality?
That's a wild thought. And to think, his bus story shared years later online, that was like the spark that ignited this huge resurgence of interest in Setalim.
Right.
It's like he accidentally opened a doorway to this, like, collective awareness that was already out there.
It went totally viral, his story did, and that prompted people to start making all these dedicated Facebook groups and forums, and there's, like, a whole online community now that's totally dedicated to, like, unraveling the mystery of Setalim. It's like this dormant awareness that was suddenly, like, reawakened.
Okay, so we've got these chilling accounts, we've got this bus story that went viral, and we've got this growing online community. But what exactly is Setalim? What makes it different from all these other ideas of parallel universes that, we hear about all the time?
That's where things get really, really interesting. We often hear about, like, the multiverse, right? Like, the idea that every decision we make creates this new branch of reality. But Luciano, based on the accounts he's gathered, he believes that Setalim is something totally different.
So he's not talking about, like those easily accessible, almost identical realities that we see in all the sci-fi movies.
No, exactly. He describes it as being much further away, much harder to access. It's not just like an adjacent reality that you can just like slip in and out of. It's almost like it exists on a totally different vibrational frequency.
Okay, that's a whole new level of weird. But if it's so far away, then why do we keep hearing about these encounters, these glimpses into this like really unsettling reality? What's pulling people towards it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And maybe that's what makes Set LM so compelling. It's like this persistent enigma, this unsettling feeling that something's watching us from just beyond the veil of reality.
Yeah, this is definitely more than just your typical what if parallel universe theory. There's something deeply unsettling about Settlem, like a sense of danger that's hard to ignore.
Yeah. It's like this really unwelcome guest that just like keeps showing up uninvited, and we're just starting to realize like how creepy it is. But if it's so hard to get to, why do these connections keep like popping up? Well, that's one of the most like intriguing questions about Setalam. It's this paradox of being so incredibly distant and yet strangely close, like
Uh,
right next door.
that's like it's right next door, but we can only get these like little glimpses through the cracks.
Yeah.
And based on what we've heard, those glimpses are terrifying. But even though, he's collected all these different accounts, does he have any theories about what might be causing these connections?
Well, he doesn't really offer any like definitive explanations, but he does acknowledge that the sheer number of accounts and how consistent they are, it can't be easily dismissed. Some theories within the ZLM community, they suggest that certain individuals might be more susceptible to these encounters than others, and maybe that's because of like a heightened sensitivity or even like past trauma.
Oh, that's interesting. That makes you think about like the nature of consciousness and perception. Like, what if Sedalim is something that's always been there, but only certain people are like tuned in to its frequency? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a possibility for sure. And some researchers that are part of the community, they've even drawn parallels to certain psychological phenomena like, shared hallucinations or the power of suggestion. But even those explanations don't really fully account for the persistent sense of dread and warning that's associated with Setalem.
Yeah. Like, there's this like underlying message trying to get through, like, stay away.
Yeah.
But if Sedalim is so undesirable, why wouldn't everyone be repulsed by it? Why are some people drawn to it?
Well, some people might be drawn to the mystery itself, the allure of the unknown. Others might be searching for answers to their own experiences, seeking validation in like shared narratives.
So it's not just about fear. It's also about like this human need to understand, to like make sense of things that challenge our understanding of the world.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so captivating. It's not about giving concrete answers. It's about like exploring all the different possibilities, grappling with the unknown, acknowledging that our understanding of reality might be much more limited than we think.
This reminds me of like how people are so fascinated by true crime or horror movies. There's this like element of wanting to confront the darkness, to understand what scares us.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel there. And with Sete Lamb, there's this added layer of intrigue because it's not just like a fictional story. It's something that people actually claim to have experienced in their own lives.
Right. Yeah, it blurs the line between fiction and reality, which makes it even more unsettling. But what about Luciano himself? How has his understanding of Setelem like evolved over time?
Well, he seems to approach it with this blend of curiosity but also caution. He acknowledges that there's so much we don't understand about this phenomenon, and he's really careful not to make like any definitive claims or anything like that.
Yeah, in the interview he talks about how for years he kind of just like filed away his bus experience as like, this bizarre anecdote.
Hmm.
He even used Sedalim as a nickname for his dog. It's like he was trying to downplay how significant it was, maybe even to himself.
Yeah, it's almost as if he like instinctively knew that going too deep into Set Alim could be dangerous, but at the same time, he couldn't completely shake off the feeling that there was something more to it.
Yeah, and then the internet comes along and his story goes super viral and suddenly he's like at the center of this whole like Sedalim thing. It's like he like stumbled upon a doorway that he wasn't meant to open.
Yeah, and that act of like sharing his story, of putting it out into the world, it seems to have like triggered something. Like it's like he inadvertently activated a beacon, drawing others who had, experienced or knew of Sedalim, drawing them to him.
Right. It's like the internet acted as a catalyst connecting all these like scattered pieces of the puzzle and forming this like bigger picture.
Yeah.
And now we're all trying to like figure out what that picture means.
We're all trying to make sense of this really unsettling reality that seems to be like intertwined with our own, whether we want it to be or not.
Okay, so we have gone like really deep into this whole world of Settlement, exploring all the accounts and the theories and this really unsettling feeling that like this other reality might be way closer than we think.
Yeah, we've talked about the recurring themes in the stories, the possible explanations, and Luciano's like journey, from someone who was kind of a skeptic to someone who's like deeply involved in this whole phenomenon now.
Yeah, it's been like a crazy journey, and I feel like we're just like barely scratching the surface of this whole mystery. But if there's one thing that's become super clear to me, at least throughout this whole deep dive, it's that Cetiline is more than just a creepy story.
Yeah, there's like a weight to it, a sense of urgency that, goes way beyond just your typical ghost story or urban legend. You know what I mean? It's like there's something important being communicated through all these accounts, like a warning we shouldn't ignore.
You mentioned earlier about Septelem maybe being a reflection of ourselves, like a warning sign about something within our own reality. What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the common threads that run through all these different accounts that we've been discussing. The desolate landscapes and the feelings of dread and unease, the beings that just seem to want to keep us out. What if all those elements are symbolic, like representations of something much deeper?
Like what? You gotta give me more to work with here.
Well, what if Set Dilem is like a manifestation of all of our collective anxieties, our fears about the future, the unknown? We're living in a time of like crazy change and uncertainty, and all those anxieties might be finding an outlet in these stories, these shared experiences of a world gone wrong.
So you're saying that Settlem is like a projection of our own internal fears,
Yeah.
like a collective nightmare that we're all creating together.
Well, it's definitely possible. And if that's the case, then maybe the warning isn't about avoiding Set Dilem itself, but it's about, like addressing the root causes of these anxieties, about confronting the darkness, within ourselves.
Okay, that's pretty deep. So what are we supposed to do with this information? I mean, if it's a reflection of all of our own anxieties, how do we even begin to change the reflection? You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think there's like a simple answer to that, but I think awareness is like the first step. By acknowledging these anxieties, by understanding how they might be shaping the way we see the world and the way we experience the world, we can start to gain a sense of agency over them.
So instead of just trying to avoid Sitalim, we should be looking at what it's trying to tell us about ourselves
Yeah.
and about like the world that we're creating.
Right. Maybe by facing our fears, by working to create a world that's more, just and sustainable, maybe then we can actually start to shift the narrative, to actually change the reflection.
It's like we're being challenged to like really look inward,
Hmm.
to examine our own shadows and see how they might be contributing to all this darkness that we see in the world around us.
And maybe by doing that, we can actually start to transform all that darkness into something more hopeful, more like aligned with the world that we actually want to create.
Wow. This has been a truly mind-bending deep dive. We've explored this really fascinating and creepy phenomenon. And I think we've all come away from this with a lot to think about.
Yeah, I hope this deep dive has encouraged all of our listeners to question their assumptions, to, explore the unknown, and to remember that reality might be a lot more complex and a lot more interconnected than we realize.
And who knows, maybe some of our listeners have even had their own experiences with Setilam. And if you have, we really encourage you to, share your stories, join the conversation, and help us all like unravel this mystery.
But remember, whether Setalem is like a real place or a psychological phenomenon, or even just a reflection of all of our fears, the most important thing is to approach it with an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism.
That's a great point to end on. To all of our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an eye on those shadows. You never know what you might find lurking there. Until next time, stay curious, stay open-minded, and stay safe out there.